Could Juan Soto really be on his way to the New York Mets? Welcome into the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Welcome into MLB Hot Stove Daily. We appreciate you joining us late on a Thursday evening. A lot of news around Major League Baseball. It is still early in the hot stove season, but it is not short of any headlines. We got several from top flight free agents so far right now, and we're going to get into them right now. Let's get into it. Now, as far as we mentioned, Juan Soto could sign with the New York Mets. Apparently, he's going to go ahead and take a meeting with the New York Mets early in free agency. We knew he was going to do that. That is not the surprise here today. The surprise is that it's happening relatively quickly, which to me only speaks to good things for the New York Mets. We've seen over the past 2 or 3 off seasons now with Steve Cohen, he likes to work early in free agency. That just seems to be the way the Mets prefer to work. Now, that doesn't rule out the possibility of this taking until, late January, early February, like it did for the Carlos Correa sweepstakes, and ultimately them deciding to jump in, and then, of course, we saw them jump out of that market as well. But it seems like they're willing to try to make these things, or try to get these things done a little bit earlier in free agency. And so the fact that they're meeting this early in free agency bodes well, I would imagine, for New York Mets fans. So you look at what the contract could possibly look like. Tim, you mentioned the 14-year deal, $630 million. Saw that in a bunch of different sites as well, as far as a number that's being thrown around in the media the last couple of days. Could that number get there? Absolutely. Could the years get there? Absolutely. Remains to be seen if the Mets really go that high to try to blow everybody else out of the water. I think the New York Yankees at that price would absolutely balk at that one. But we'll see where he ultimately ends up. The conversation to me right now, it's not necessarily about where he's going to end up or anything like that. We're still way too early in that process. He is a Boris client, I do believe. And so this is going to take at least until the winter meetings. I think the New York Mets, if they do really go above and beyond as far as an offer, say they give a Godfather offer of 15 years, $700 million, I think you would sign on the dotted line right now. But I don't think that offer is coming. I think they'll still blow everybody else out of the water, don't get me wrong. I think the New York Mets have the kind of money that no other team really has to work with. And we'll see how long that remains to be the case. But for right now, Steve Cohen just seems to have bottomless pockets, and he's willing to invest it in his baseball team to try to win a World Series. And he's rightfully confident in the future of his baseball club. You saw a couple of years ago when they thought they were going to, really make a push for a World Series. They had Verlander and Scherzer on their roster, and ultimately they fell flat on their face. They did the right thing, though. They got rid of those guys, they kind of used their money that they had to try to acquire prospects by dealing those guys. Great job by the Mets for the pieces that they got in return. Nice team building strategy. Something that not a lot of other teams could have done, being able to eat as much money as they did on those two contracts, and it worked out for them in the long run. They got some good prospects to work with. I didn't buy the rumors that we saw last offseason that they would then pivot, lose those prospects that they acquired in a trade to try to bring somebody in last offseason via trade. Free agency, that's another story. Steve Cohen is willing to use that money as a weapon, whereas other teams don't necessarily have the financial wherewithal that they do. And so when the case comes to Juan Soto, I think they have that kind of money that they can just throw it on the table and say, you know what, we have the best offer in the business. What are we really talking about here? So that's kind of where I think we're at right now with Juan Soto. The fact that it's happening right now, this early in free agency, that's really more of the story here, and this really fitting the timeline with the way the Mets like to do business. We saw last offseason they signed multiple free agents of their own early in free agency, even solving a few outside needs as well, bringing in outside free agents before we got to the winter meetings. I believe they had 3 or 4 guys already signed by the time we got to the winter meetings last year. They did the same thing a year prior as well, with a couple of their own guys as well. So I'm curious to see if this bodes well for them being able to recruit Juan Soto around the winter meetings. I'm not saying it's going to happen before. I do think this is going to be something Juan Soto and Scott Boras are going to want to champion and say, hey, Scott Boras had a rough year last year with the guys he took into free agency, Jordan Montgomery and Blake Snell namely. We saw how the Montgomery thing really didn't work out. Snell was able to recover in the second half of the year and was able to regain his Cy Young form. He should do well in free agency this year, but everybody in the industry was out there saying maybe this is finally the time. Scott Boras, in the industry just say, we're done with you. We're not going to play your game, Scott Boras. I'm pretty sure he heard every single one of those comments, and he's going to make every single one of those people eat crow. Welcome back, Tim. Should the Mets let Alonso sign with the Yankees and sign Adames, Soto, and Sasaki? Good question. I do actually like this one. First, let's deal with the Alonso part here. The part that you're saying here is that if they let Alonso go, they're doing it so that they can acquire Soto, Sasaki, and Adames. By saying that, you're basically implying that they don't necessarily have the financial wherewithal to do all 4. I don't think that's necessarily the case. Maybe you just don't think that there's a spot in the lineup for Alonso. I don't think that's the case either. I don't think it's an either-or proposition the way you kind of set that question up. I do think they can get all 4 done if they really were interested in coming to the Mets. They could easily make it work financially with Steve Cohen's money. Now, as far as the second part of your question, sign Adames, sign Soto, sign Sasaki. We'll start with the Soto stuff. That's very possible there. I do think there's a likelihood Soto could sign there. I would say it's really a 3, maybe a 4-team race there. But if I had to handicap it, if the Mets throw down the money that I think they're going to, I think the Mets have to be considered the favorite. Outside of that, I think the Dodgers are going to be right there along with the Yankees. If the Dodgers are willing to pony up the money the way the Mets are, or at least get close to the money the Mets are offering, I think he could go to the Dodgers. I just think the Yankees finish a distant third if they get to that level of money for a Juan Soto. For the Sasaki part of this, I really don't think he's going to go to New York. I know that there's a lot of headlines out there right now connecting him to the Dodgers, and I do think that's ultimately where he's going to end up. Seems like he's got a real connection with Shohei Ohtani and Yamamoto. I think they would like to kind of form kind of a 3-headed monster there. In addition to all the other talent that they have, Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts. You see sometimes international players like to go at it on their own, kind of take over a market on their own, and really kind of capitalize on their own value that they bring to a market, and really try to make the best for their own situation, for best for their career, all that kind of thing. Sasaki, I think, is more concerned with winning, which is a very nice sentiment to have when you're 22, 23 years old. He's not going to cost a whole lot, obviously, for anybody bringing him in. So I think it's more about winning for him at this time. So I think the Dodgers are considerably heavy favorites above any other team Mets, I believe, could hold a candle to them, but we're talking maybe 5-10% max. Outside of that, teams like the Rangers, who have had success with international players, the Padres as well. You always have to mention the Mariners. Twins, to some extent, have had some success there, along with the Toronto Blue Jays. So those would be the teams I would keep my eyes peeled for. Maybe even the New York Yankees, just because the name, brand, all that kind of a thing. But I would think still it's got to be Dodgers or bust if you're betting on that one. Last, we have Adames. Could they go after Adames, maybe fill him in at shortstop or short or third base, wherever they want to plug him in? Defensively, I think it'd be an upgrade for them at third base. I don't necessarily see him being as a great fit there in New York. I think they have other priorities, primarily upgrading their rotation. They have a lot of holes in that rotation coming into this offseason, along with some bullpen help. Not to say Adames wouldn't be a good get for them, but I think they'd rather go with the young guys that they have at that third base spot right now. Maybe get a veteran in there to kind of shepherd them along. Maybe a guy that you can dump at the All-Star break if you decide to acquire another bat around the All-Star break as well. But Adames, I don't think is really a great fit there in New York, at least with the Mets anyway. There are a number of other teams that could use him at short, second, or third. We saw some headlines today anyway that Alex Bregman was also open to playing second, short, or third base as well. Two of the top 2 or 3, I would say, middle infielders available in this market. I really like both players, but I don't think the Mets are a great fit for Adames. But to kind of wrap up the conversation on your question there, Alonso to the Yankees in order to be able to sign Adames, Soto, and Sasaki. I just don't really see Alonso being a great fit on the Yankees. I know he loves New York and all that kind of thing, but I think if he stays in New York, he's staying a Met. I don't think that Cohen's going to let him go elsewhere anyway, and if they really wanted to get it all done, they absolutely could, bringing in Alonso, Adames, Soto, and Sasaki. I just think that they're going to end up with probably 2 or 3 starting pitchers, Sasaki not being one of them. They'd probably bring back a couple of their own guys and maybe add one more, high-profile pitcher as well. A Snell, Fried type, somewhere in that 1A, 1B category. Soto, I think, is very likely to go either to one of those 3 teams or to the ever-popular dark horse mystery team. But very curious to see what happens, of course, with Juan Soto. But again, the headline here today that we, don't want to read too much in to them, having discussions this early. The only caveat I'll put with that is that the Mets like to act early in free agency, and maybe this is more of the Mets just saying, hey, we'd rather get you in, see if we have a real shot. If we do, we're cool. If we don't, we're out. Maybe that's where this conversation is at, where they wanted to drive the meeting here early in free agency rather than waiting for a few more weeks. But that's kind of where we're at right now with the Juan Soto market. Second headline today is about Sasaki. The Dodgers, as I mentioned, are considered the heavy favorites for Sasaki. There's been multiple headlines over the last 2 or 3 weeks now. I take that back. 2 or 3 months, more notably, coming more prevalent anyway in the international market as far as reports having him connected to the Dodgers. Him feeling comfortably being on the same team with Shohei Ohtani and Yamamoto, having won the World Baseball Classic together. He seems very comfortable being in that type of a clubhouse, and I don't see him as being one of those types that likes to go at it on his own in another market. Not to say that he couldn't, but he might be the rare case where he's okay being in a situation like the one that's been built there in LA. And you look at the Dodgers, they just won the World Series. They're loaded, and they're going to add more pieces this offseason. It seems like the other headline that I haven't mentioned yet is Teoscar Hernandez is drawing some heavy interest from East Coast teams, most notably the Baltimore Orioles and the Boston Red Sox, looking for a corner bat. I think he's still likely to go back to the Dodgers. He had a great season there. He got a connection there with Ohtani. I think if Ohtani says, hey, I'd really like to have Teoscar back, it's going to get done. So I think this is all on whether or not Teoscar wants to come back, and 2, if Ohtani wants him back. If they do want to get that deal done, they'll figure it out. If they don't, then we could see him move on to somewhere else. But I think the Dodgers, again, have to be considered the heavy favorite for Teoscar Hernandez. As far as the Sasaki conversation, the rich just get richer. Very good, young pitcher. Probably going to be a number 1 ace type pitcher once he comes over. Probably take a year or 2 for him to settle into the big leagues. He had a little bit of regression this year, but he's still 5.5 years younger than his competition level. So it's really impressive what he's been able to do internationally. But it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment period for when he comes over. We saw that with Yamamoto to a certain extent, but he was still lights out. We saw that with Senga, but he was also still lights out. pitchers coming over from the NPB are showing more and more success earlier on than we've seen in other past cases of players coming over from the NPB. So I'm very excited to see what happens with Sasaki wherever he does end up. Let's go ahead and flip over to the headlines today. The signing has now been official. Angels do get the deal done with Kyle Hendricks, 1 year, $3 million. I wanted to kind of shine a light on the second half of the pitching market. Of course, you have the top end guys. Guys like Burns, Fried, Snell, all those guys are at the top end of the pitching market. Then you get into guys that are more of journeyman types that could still fill a nice hole in a rotation. Guys like Andrew Heaney, guys like Sean Manaea, Luis Severino. Nick Martinez had a great year last year. Seems like he's going to parlay that into probably a 3-year deal somewhere. He had a 3 ERA. One other name, kind of on the next tier of players below that category that I want to keep you guys interested in is Michael Soroka. Yes, that Michael Soroka who pitched all those years ago at the Atlanta Braves to the detriment of his career. We saw him really, run out there, and I believe it was Game 1 and Game 3 of a postseason series, trying to give the Braves everything he possibly had when they didn't really have much pitching at the major league level to speak of that wasn't hurt or underperforming at that time. And good on him. He pitched well, but that specific instance really cost him in his career. Injuries have beset him. Took away multiple years of his career already to this point. We saw him traded along with 5 or 6 players from the Atlanta Braves in kind of a roster-clearing move to the White Sox last year. And the reason why I bring him up, even though he pitched to a 4.75 ERA last year, from the end of May on, he pitched to a sub-3 ERA. He seems like a guy that's getting back to the form that we saw back at his height of his career. 39% whiff rate. He looked absolutely great in the second half of the year. Now you look at the losses, no wins, 10 losses. We're talking about the White Sox here, so it's not like he had, the 29 Yankees on his behind him as well. But I'm just saying he's a player that I would keep my eye on if I'm a team that's cash strapped. For instance, as you guys know, my favorite team is the Texas Rangers. They're trying to improve around the periphery. Maybe Michael Soroka would be a name that could come in 2 years, $15 million, 2 years, $13 million, somewhere in there. Give him some money to kind of solidify his family and his future, since he was kind of robbed of that because of his injuries. And just let him go out there and pitch. If he's out of a long relief role out of the bullpen, or if he's your 4th or 5th starter, and he gives you that type of production, you're sitting there counting your lucky stars that he's able to give you that level of production. That's not a big investment, especially when you consider the other starters are out there going to get $30+ million very likely this offseason. Even if you trade for a guy or even sign one of those intermediate free agents like a Heaney, like a Severino, like a Manaea, you're still looking 10+ per season. If you can get Soroka on a $7.5 million deal, kind of like what Eric Fedde got from the White Sox, maybe that would be the way to go. I think he's got a lot left in the tank because of the injuries. He's still got a lot of time left that he hasn't thrown with that arm. But of course, the mileage is there though because of the injuries. You got to take a little bit, be a little bit hesitant as far as the length of that deal. But if 2 years, $15 million, that's nothing. We're seeing league average players right now one win, I believe, is worth $8 million, and you'd be paying less than that. He's one name I am very excited to see what's next for him after a successful second half of the year there with the White Sox, and just a good baseball story. The injuries that he suffered there with the Atlanta Braves, finding a second life with the White Sox, and ultimately being able to improve upon what could be what we probably would have thought coming into the year would have been his final season in the big leagues. But no, he said, I'm ready to go. He went out there and performed, and I'm curious to see what's the next chapter in his story. So drop us a like, hit that subscribe if you're curious about not just the top end of the free agent class, not just the intermediate guys, Heaney, Eovaldi, all those kind of guys, but also what's going to happen at the back end of the free agent class. You look every year as to the guys that make 1 year, $3 million signings with Kyle Hendricks, for instance, that make a big impact on teams that are trying to make a push for a postseason spot. Not saying the Angels are going to do that, but a team that's trying to fill in the back half of their rotation or a long relief role with a Michael Soroka certainly could do worse in this free agent class. There's so many arms out there that are going to be bullpen arms as well. He's one name I would keep my eye on if I'm looking for a multi-inning guy out of the bullpen. Very curious to see what's next in his story. So appreciate you guys joining us tonight. Make sure you guys join us again tomorrow night. We're going to be live for you again around 9:30. Little bit late start tonight anyway. Long day at work anyway, but we'll be with you guys every single day through the winter meetings. So make sure you hit that like and subscribe. We're even going to try to be at the winter meetings for you guys this year. If we can get the availability to do so, I'll already be off. So worst case scenario, I'll be in the studio for you guys. But that's kind of where we're at today, and where we're looking at going forward into the winter meetings. Now, one thing I will mention that you guys have seen me do before is we try to do some trades as well this off season. We'll also go through some team by team analysis as far as what they could do, what they could ultimately go for this off season. We'll go through and probably do a couple of teams a day. So, for instance, if we do the Rangers, we might do the Astros as well, division rivals, kind of go through what they're looking for in free agency, what they could trade away, what they could bring in, guys they could look to add to their roster, guys they could look to re-sign to their roster, what their lineup could look like next year, what the rotation and bullpen is going to look like, and not just for next year, but what does their future look like? Is this the final swan song for a team like the Houston Astros, or do they find a way to keep this thing going for another 2, 3, 4 years? Those are things we're going to be focusing on over the next few weeks. So make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe. Appreciate you guys taking the time to join us late here. I know we started really late this evening, but we'll be live for you guys again tomorrow night around 9 o'clock. So be sure to join us then. Thank you guys, and y'all have a great evening.